The moment my father realized who my husband really was, he dropped his coffee cup. Not set it down, dropped it. It shattered across the marble floor of the conference room he'd been renting for 22 years, and nobody moved to clean it up. Because standing in the doorway, holding the lease agreement my family had been begging to renegotiate for 3 months, was the man they'd spent an entire decade calling the janitor. My husband, Daniel, the owner of the building. My mother's face went white. My brother actually laughed, a nervous, disbelieving laugh, and said, "This is a joke, right? Tell me this is a joke." It wasn't a joke. And what Daniel said next made my father sit down for the first time in his life without being offered a chair. But to understand how we got to that conference room, to understand why my husband stayed silent for 10 years while my family humiliated him at every dinner, every holiday, every family photo they cropped him out of, you need to go back to the very beginning. Because here's the thing, nobody in that room knew yet. Daniel hadn't just bought that building. He'd bought it for a reason. And when that reason came out, even I was shocked. And I'm his wife. Stay with me. This one's worth it. My name is Sarah, and I grew up in what my father loved to call a legacy family. My dad, Richard, built a commercial insurance firm from the ground up in the 80s. By the time I was in high school, the company had over 100 employees and occupied the top 3 floors of a glass office tower downtown. That building was my father's pride. He used to point at it from the highway and say, "See that? Kingsley and Associates, 14th, 15th, and 16th floor. One day, I'll buy the whole thing." In our house, everything was about status. My older brother, Marcus, went to business school and joined the firm. My younger sister, Vanessa, married a surgeon, and my mother mentioned the word surgeon so often at parties, I'm surprised it wasn't printed on the napkins. And then, there was me, the middle child, the disappointment. Not because I failed at anything. I was a pediatric nurse, and I loved my work. But in my family, a nurse wasn't a career. It was a phase, something I was doing until I married well. Then I met Daniel. I was 28. My car broke down in the parking garage of a medical complex after a 16-hour shift, and I was sitting on the curb about to cry when a man in work boots and a grey maintenance jacket crouched down next to me and said, "Dead battery or dead alternator? Because one of those I can fix right now, and the other one means I'm buying you coffee while you wait for a tow." It was the alternator. He bought the coffee. Daniel was calm in a way I'd never experienced. He listened, actually listened. He didn't perform. He didn't name drop. When I asked what he did, he said, "Building maintenance and property management, mostly commercial stuff." I didn't think twice about it. Why would I? We dated for a year and a half. He met my family exactly 4 times before the wedding, and every single time, my father found a way to make him feel small. The first dinner, Dad looked at Daniel's calloused hands and said, "So, maintenance. That's what? Mopping floors? Changing light bulbs?" And Daniel just smiled and said, "Some days, yeah, somebody's got to keep the lights on." My father laughed, not with him. At him. That night, my mother pulled me into the kitchen and whispered, "Sarah, honey, you're a beautiful girl. You can do so much better than a janitor." And that was it. From that night forward, that's who Daniel was to my family. Not Daniel, not Sarah's husband. The janitor. Now, pay attention to this part, because every single detail I'm about to tell you comes back later. Every single one. We got married at a small ceremony with 40 guests. My father gave a toast, and I use the word toast generously, where he said, and I quote, "Sarah always did like fixer-uppers. Let's hope this one comes with a warranty." The room laughed. Daniel squeezed my hand under the table and whispered, "It's okay. Let them have their fun." I asked him that night why he didn't defend himself, and he said something I didn't understand until 10 years later. "Sarah, the loudest man in the room, is usually the one with the most to prove. I don't have anything to prove." Year 2, Thanksgiving. My brother Marcus, 3 glasses of wine deep, tossed his car keys at Daniel across the table and said, "Hey, while you're up, can you pull my car around? You're basically staff, right?" My father howled. My mother covered her smile with her napkin. Daniel caught the keys, set them gently on the table, and said, "I only park cars for people who tip well, Marcus. You don't strike me as a tipper." Year 4. My sister Vanessa's anniversary party at the country club. The family photo. The photographer lined everyone up, and my mother, my own mother, put her hand on Daniel's chest and said, "Actually, sweetheart, let's do immediate family first. You understand." He stood off to the side and watched my family take a photo without him. He never mentioned it again, but I found out later he kept the invitation to that party, kept it in a folder. Remember that folder. It matters. Year 6 was the worst one. My father was doing his annual State of the Family speech at Christmas, because yes, that's a real thing he did, and he announced that he was restructuring his will. Marcus would get the company, Vanessa would get the lake house, and me, Sarah, will be taken care of, he said, once her situation stabilizes. Then he looked directly at Daniel and added, "We don't hand family money to hired help." I stood up to leave. Daniel put his hand on my arm and, I'll never forget this, he was smiling. Not a hurt smile, not a fake smile, something almost amused, like he was watching a movie where he already knew the ending. In the car, I broke down. 10 years of this. I told him I was done with them, done defending them, done showing up, and Daniel said the strangest thing. He said, "Don't cut them off yet. Give it 2 more years, trust me." "Why 2 years?" I asked. He looked out the windshield for a long moment and said, "Because their lease is up in 2 years." I laughed. I thought it was a joke, some metaphor I didn't get. It was not a metaphor. Here's what I didn't know about my husband, what nobody knew. Daniel's father, Raymond, had been a building superintendent his entire life. A genuinely brilliant man who understood commercial buildings better than the people who owned them. In the late 90s, Raymond scraped together everything he had and partnered with 2 other tradesmen to buy a rundown 4-unit commercial property at auction. They fixed it themselves. Nights, weekends, their own hands. They rented it out, took the income, and bought another one, then another. By the time Raymond passed away, 2 years before I met Daniel, that scrappy little partnership had quietly become a portfolio of 11 commercial properties held under a boring, invisible name. Corvus Holdings, LLC. Nobody had ever heard of Corvus Holdings. That was the point. Raymond had one rule, and he drilled it into his son. Own quietly. The moment people know what you have, they treat you like what you have instead of who you are. Daniel inherited everything, and he didn't retire to a beach. He kept working, managing the properties himself, doing maintenance himself, walking his own buildings in work boots and a grey jacket, because that's how his father taught him to know a building, from the boiler room up. So when Daniel told me he worked in building maintenance and property management, he wasn't lying. He just left out one word: ownership. And now, here's where it gets crazy. Here's the part where I need you to remember my father's glass tower, 14th, 15th, and 16th floor, the building he pointed at from the highway, the building he swore he'd buy one day. 8 years into our marriage, that building went up for sale. The original owner passed away. The estate wanted a quick, quiet transaction, and it never even hit the public market. Corvus Holdings bought it. My husband, the man my father wouldn't let stand in a family photo, became my father's landlord. And my father had absolutely no idea. Now, you might be wondering, why didn't Daniel say anything? Why not walk into Christmas dinner, drop the deed on the table, and watch their faces melt? I asked him the same thing when I finally found out, and trust me. How? I found out is its own story, because he didn't tell me. I discovered it. It was a Tuesday. Daniel had left his laptop open, and an email notification popped up while I was watering the plants. Kingsley and Associates, lease renewal package, floors 14 to 16. Kingsley, my maiden name, my father's company. My hands were shaking when I called him. He came home, sat me down, and told me everything. His father, the portfolio, the building, all of it. I said, "Daniel, you've owned my dad's building for 2 years. 2 years. Why wouldn't you tell me?" And his answer stopped me cold. He said, "Because the day I told you, you'd look at your family differently, and I needed you to see them clearly first. Not through my eyes, through your own." Then he opened a drawer and pulled out that folder, the one I mentioned. Inside was every invitation he'd been excluded from, every immediate family only note, a napkin from our wedding, and a printed spreadsheet. "What's this?" I asked. "Your father's rent," he said. "Look at the last column." I looked. For 2 straight years, while every other tenant in that building had standard annual increases, Kingsley and Associates' rent hadn't gone up a single dollar. "I froze it," Daniel said quietly. "Market rate for their floors went up almost 19%. I ate the difference." I stared at him. "Why? Why would you do that for them, after everything?" And he said, "I didn't do it for them, Sarah. I did it for you. Whatever happens to your family's company happens to your mother's retirement, your niece's college fund. I wasn't going to let my pride cost your family their future." Let that sink in. For 2 years, the man they called the Janitor was silently subsidizing the company that mocked him. But here's the thing about mercy. It only works on people capable of receiving it. And my father was about to prove he wasn't. 6 months before the lease expired, my father did something that changed everything. He tried to buy the building. His company was doing well on paper, and buying the tower had been his white whale for decades. So his lawyers sent an unsolicited offer to Corvus Holdings LLC. Daniel declined politely through his attorney. No hard feelings, business as usual. My father does not accept no. So he tried something else. And this is the part that still makes my stomach turn. Unable to buy the building, my father decided to devalue it. If the building's income looked shaky, maybe the faceless LLC would sell cheap. So Marcus, my brother, the golden boy, the heir, started making calls to other tenants in the building, spreading whispers. "The elevators are failing inspection. There's a mold issue on 9. Ownership is underwater and cutting corners on safety. You might want to look at other buildings before your renewal." Lies, all of it. But 2 tenants got spooked and gave notice. Daniel found out within a week, because when you've personally fixed a building's boilers, the tenants trust you, and one of them forwarded him Marcus's email. I remember the night he showed me. It was the only time in 10 years I ever saw Daniel angry. Not loud angry, quiet angry, the scary kind. He put the email down and said, "Humiliating me at dinner? That's rudeness. I can live with rudeness. But this," he tapped the email, "this is my father's life's work. They're not mocking a janitor anymore. They're attacking the thing my dad built with his hands." Then he looked at me and asked the question I'd been waiting 10 years for. "Are you okay if I stop protecting them?" And God help me, I said yes. What happened next was surgical. Step 1, the rent freeze ended. Legally, quietly, with proper notice. Kingsley and Associates got a renewal offer at true market rate, the same rate as every other tenant, plus recovery of standard increases going forward. Completely fair. Completely devastating to a company that had budgeted around an artificially frozen rent for 2 years. Step 2. Daniel's attorney sent a formal cease and desist regarding tenant interference and defamation, with the forwarded emails attached. Marcus's name was on every one of them. My father now knew that the landlord had proof his son had tried to sabotage the building. Step 3, and this is my favorite part, Daniel offered them a meeting. A face-to-face negotiation with the principal owner of Corvus Holdings, who prefers to resolve matters personally. My family had been begging for this meeting for months. To them, the owner of Corvus was a ghost, some faceless investor they could charm, pressure, or out-negotiate. My father spent 2 weeks preparing. Marcus built a whole presentation. My mother, I found this out later, booked a private dining room to celebrate afterward, because my father told her, "Once I'm in the room with this guy, it's done. I've never lost a face-to-face in my life." The meeting was set for a Thursday morning, 16th floor, their own conference room. And here's the detail that gets me every time. The night before, my mother called and invited me, just me, immediate family only, to the celebration dinner. 10 years of cropping my husband out of photos, and they cropped him out of one last thing without even knowing they were doing it. I said, "We'll see how the meeting goes, Mum." She had no idea. Thursday morning, 9:58 a.m. My father, my brother, their CFO, and 2 attorneys sat on one side of the conference table. I know exactly how it went because I was there. Daniel asked me to come, and my father assumed I'd shown up to support them. He even said, "Good, Sarah's here. Family presents a united front." You have no idea, Dad. At 10 o'clock exactly, the door opened, and Daniel walked in, not in work boots, not in a grey maintenance jacket. A charcoal suit, a leather portfolio, and his father's 40-year-old watch on his wrist. The room did that thing where reality lags. My brother actually smiled at first, confused, like his brain filed Daniel under wrong place. Marcus said, Buddy, we've got this room booked. Big meeting." Daniel said, "I know. It's with me." Silence. You could hear the hayvac, which, ironically, Daniel had personally repaired the previous spring. My father laughed, one sharp, defensive bark. "What is this? Sarah, what is this?" Daniel set his portfolio down at the head of the table, took out the lease, and said the sentence, "I will replay in my head until the day I die." "Richard, 10 years ago, you asked me if my job was mopping floors and changing light bulbs. It's a bit more than that. I'm the owner and managing principal of Corvus Holdings. I own this building. I've owned it for almost 3 years. Please, sit down. You've been trying to get this meeting for months." That's when the coffee cup hit the floor. My mother wasn't even supposed to be there. She'd come up to drop off my father's reading glasses, and she stood frozen in the doorway with them still in her hand. She looked at Daniel, then at me, and whispered, "The janitor." And Daniel, completely calm, said, "Still am, some days. Somebody's got to keep the lights on." His exact words from that first dinner, 10 years later, word for word. Marcus tried to recover. He actually stood up, buttoned his jacket, and slid into pitch mode. "Daniel, Dan, look, obviously there's history here, but this is business, and I think if we approach this as family." Daniel raised one hand. "Family. Interesting word. Sit down, Marcus. Because before we talk about your lease, we need to talk about the emails you sent to the tenants on floors 9 and 11. Marcus's face went grey. My father turned to him slowly. "What emails?" And that was the moment my father's world actually broke. Not when he learned his son-in-law owned his building. When he learned his heir, his golden boy, had committed the sabotage, and the man they'd humiliated for a decade had the receipts. But Daniel wasn't finished, because there was one more twist coming, one even I didn't know about. Daniel opened the portfolio and slid a single old photograph across the table to my father. "Before we negotiate," he said, "I want you to tell me if you recognize the man in this picture." My father picked it up, frowned, and then I watched 30 years of arrogance drain out of his face. "Where did you get this?" "That's my father," Daniel said. "Raymond. 1991. He was the superintendent of the first office your company ever rented, the old brick building on Fenton Street. You remember it, Richard, because in the winter of '93, the pipes burst on a Sunday night, and my father worked 11 hours straight in a flooded basement to save your file room. Every client record you had, paper, back then, your whole company was in those cabinets. My father's hands were trembling. You told him, I owe you one, Ray. Anything you ever need. Daniel paused. 2 years later, my father asked you for one thing. He was starting a little property partnership and needed a commercial liability policy. And every carrier was quoting him triple because he had no history. He came to you, the insurance man whose business he'd saved. He asked for a fair rate, not a favor. Fair rate. I had never heard this story. My heart was pounding. You laughed at him, Daniel said quietly. You told him, and he wrote it down that night, because that's the kind of man he was. You told him, stick to mopping floors, Ray. Ownership is for a different kind of people. The room was absolutely silent. He kept that note pinned inside his toolbox for the rest of his life. Not out of anger, as fuel. And when he died, I found it. So no, Richard, I didn't buy this building as an investment. There were better deals that year. I bought this one because the man who told my father that ownership was for a different kind of people had been pointing at it from the highway for 20 years, telling everyone he'd own it someday. Daniel leaned forward. He never got to see this, but you and I are going to finish the conversation you started with him in 1995. My father, I want to be honest about this, did not yell. He didn't storm out. He sat there, holding a photograph of a man he'd insulted 30 years ago, sitting in a building owned by that man's son, next to his own son, who'd just been exposed as a saboteur, and he aged 10 years in 10 seconds. He finally looked up and said the only thing he could say. What do you want? And here's why I married Daniel. Because what he wanted wasn't destruction. 3 things, Daniel said. 1. The lease gets renewed at fair market rate. Same terms as every tenant on every floor. No revenge pricing. My father believed a building only works when it's fair to everyone in it. I'm not dishonoring him to spite you. My father blinked. He'd been braced for eviction. 2. Marcus resigns from the company's leadership. What he did wasn't rudeness. It was tortious interference. And I have every email. I won't press it. He's gone. Your company deserves to survive, Richard. It doesn't deserve to be inherited by someone who builds by burning other people's houses down. Marcus started to protest. One look from my father ended it. 2 weeks later, he was out. And 3. Daniel looked at my mother, still frozen in the doorway. 10 years of family photos. Sarah has been in all of them. I've been in none. That ends. Not because I need your acceptance. I stopped needing that a long time ago. But your daughter has spent a decade being made to choose between her family and her husband, and she never once complained. And she deserves better than all of us. Especially you. My mother started crying. Real crying. The kind I'd never seen from her. And then my father did the single most shocking thing of that entire day. More shocking than the reveal, more shocking than the photograph. He stood up, walked around the table, and extended his hand to my husband. Your father was a better man than me, he said. It appears he raised one too. Daniel shook his hand. He'd have appreciated hearing that. 25 years ago. I know, my father said. I know. It's been a year and a half since that meeting. Kingsley and Associates is still on floors 14 through 16, paying fair rent, on time, every month. My father stepped back to a chairman role and promoted his COO, a woman who'd been doing Marcus's job for years anyway. The company is actually doing better. Marcus and I are working on it. He sent Daniel a 2-page apology letter 8 months in. Daniel's response was 1 line. Come help me repaint the lobby on 9, and we'll call it even. Marcus showed up, in $300 jeans. He ruined them. It was a start. My mother now introduces Daniel as my son-in-law. Daniel, he's in commercial real estate, and every time she says it, he catches my eye and winks, because we both know she'd say janitor if it impressed people more. And last Christmas, at the family photo, my mother physically pulled Daniel to the center of the group, front row, right next to my father. That photo sits on our mantle now, right beside an old picture of Raymond in his work jacket, standing in front of a little brick building on Fenton Street. 2 janitors, 1 frame. My father pointed at that mantle last month and said, "You know, Daniel, I spent my whole life telling people to look at what I owned." He tapped Raymond's photo. "Your dad never told anyone anything, and he ended up owning the view." Daniel just smiled and said what he always says, what his father taught him. "What I now know is the most dangerous sentence a quiet man can say. Somebody's got to keep the lights on." If this story hit you, do me a favor, like the video, and tell me in the comments, could you have stayed silent for 10 years? Because I've thought about it a lot, and honestly, I don't think I could. Subscribe for more stories like this one. Next week, a groom's family demanded the bride sign away her little bakery before the wedding. They had no idea her little bakery was the parent company of the venue they'd already paid for. You won't want to miss it.